everyone, and welcome back to more World End Economica. How are you enjoying the series? Please let me know in the comments below. The moon had low gravity, so it was common to utilize a spring when doing any weight training. A rod and coil made for that purpose had been sold online and was a rather popular product. However, it was questionable how many who bought it actually used it. After all, the fitness company made a fortune selling sets of rods and coils and managed to sell over 3 million sets, including similar items, but no matter how you looked at it, any single set would have been more than sufficient. In fact, the population on the moon was about 700,000 people, although tourists would send that number up to 1 million. There were many people out there who would just buy it and not use it, knowing that a new model was on the way. Even if the equipment was used properly, there was the matter of using it for more difficult applications. And then the user manual would neglect to note this. The words of my stubborn, old-fashioned father would repeat in my head while I did weight training. With weights on my arms, shoulders, back, and abs, I would do balance training involving headstands and light somersaults, which would go on for no more than 20 minutes, since I wasn't aiming to be an athlete, and any training beyond that wasn't really necessary. If nothing else, the people who came from the town my folks were from, the kind who could never tell a lie, would all say in unison to take care of the body, for it will always be useful. The height of net prosperity and the lower gravity and the near unlimited supply of electrical power on the moon, physical labor was categorized as being the lowest of the low in terms of recognition. There weren't any people who had made it big with physical labor. At best, there was always the consideration of those who worked in show business. But even then, the ones who got paid the big money weren't the actors who toiled away in their craft, but the people who managed them. However, after leaving home and taking the time to observe things outside of the boundaries of the rules of society, I had come to understand that there were a lot of truth in those words. Even after evading the police sent to bring me back home, I realized that there was some useful advice to be had, as expected of those seasoned veterans who escaped from the jaws of guerrilla fighters, secret police, and military juntas. I wiped the sweat off with a towel and put on my clothes, the same clothes Lisa and Hagana were complaining about before. After 2 washes, I probably finally got rid of the smell, but I had a feeling that I'd washed away something like an important mark of readiness that had been stained into the clothing in the last 3 months. The one thing I'd become aware of after leaving home was that people were relaxed by the smell of detergent. The word cleanliness had a rather weak image. Then again, this wasn't half bad. I stretched my back and tossed my backpack over my shoulder. Since today was Sunday and the trading houses were closed, it was an important day for me, as I could just go out and just walk around. It also appeared that the culprit from the theft was arrested, though the odds of being mistakenly arrested and taken home had diminished. It was just as Lisa suspected. The culprit was a young man who had also run away from home. Leaving home without any means, turned into a life of crime and causing trouble for others, this guy was clearly the typical idiot. It's possible that he wasn't from Earth, but was born and raised on the moon. As someone born and raised on the moon myself, I could sympathize, But for people from Earth, it seemed that the lower gravity was to blame for making many people lightheaded. Aside from issues of pride, many could live on the collected scraps left over from the geniuses and prodigies of Newton City who had amassed great fortunes. Some would say that it was the fault of the sense of security, perhaps. Compared to the people who came to the moon from Earth, within the groups of tourists were also those who came here with some great sense of purpose. They came to the moon to do something or another. It could be that they came to find a tranquil life they couldn't find back on Earth. Likewise, they might have came to find a thrilling life that couldn't be found back on Earth. After all, I understood that one must step forward when one had a purpose at hand. Anyway, the cost to take the orbital elevator by any legal means was staggering, and there were many hurdles to clear if you were to look for any discounts or exemptions. In any case, there were many Earth dogs who knew where they came from, where they were, and what they should be doing. Literally, there was Earth at the bottom of their shoes. That was why I hated these Earth dogs. I tied my shoes and left through the hallway. The place was eerily quiet. Lisa had headed out to the restaurant after eating breakfast. I knew that Hagana was still here, but outside of going to the bathroom, she would seclude herself in her room, and you couldn't even hear a peep coming out of there. I had no idea what she was doing in there, but I got eerie vibes. That was why I had everything I owned in my backpack. I wouldn't be surprised if Hagana took a hammer to my PC and destroyed it while I was out. I did not continue walking down the corridor towards the living room. Instead, I went up the stairs to the second floor. The church was in a low-income area, much like everything else around it. It was built upon parts of a crater that had been partially zoned, so navigating the sector was a bit complex. The entrance to the sector was along a relatively wide street, but the second and third floor portions seemed to cling to the cliffs as they stretched upward. According to Lisa, these places weren't very well off financially. The faded parts of buildings here and there around the church were obvious, but they appeared neither small nor inexpensive. Ascending the narrow steps took you to two rooms that looked out on a small yard from which you could see the sky part. As they were on both on a slant, the rooms themselves were small. One of them was apparently Lisa's. There was a white painted chair and table in the small garden. And if you were to ascend the stairs another level, they became more like a ladder. What functioned as a handrail was actually what Lisa used to carry a basket of laundry. There was a room, or rather a storage shed, on the third floor, and past that you could reach a site near the roof. The door was wooden, but there was a note on it with a handwritten note from Lisa that said to always lock the door when leaving. I was sure people had been locked out many times. I, of course, would be returning through the front entrance, and with that I headed out. The moon was in the middle of the 2-week-long afternoon, and the lights that permeated the dome over the lunar city during this time felt rather good. Today I could see Earth from its usual place. The yard had something of an extravagant feel to it, with a large tree growing very close to a cliff behind it. I wondered if the placement of the table and chair were so Lisa Hanagata could enjoy the shade of that tree. Cliffs all around the place gave a feeling of isolation. It was a nice place. Right now there was only the noise of the laundry machine, and it was clear what belonged to whom. Looking over the jumble of streets on the 6th outer section, you could see someone on the roof casually reading something on a computer terminal, and someone repairing a roof. You could see bakeries and a dry cleaner, buildings spewing out water vapor from misshapen chimneys, and homes under construction. However, my objection wasn't to survey that area. I mean, it would be nice to scale the cliff in the back and roam around the plateau above, but I'd probably end up on someone else's property and they'd call the cops on me. I moved nimbly between the houses seen from the park, and having found the continuation of the path towards the top of the plateau, broke into a run as I left the park. What was before me was what I had seen from the park. Before me were the buildings of Newton City and pointed in the direction of Earth. I left the 6th Outer District Section's business district and got on the board, the rather boringly named Lunar Development Train. It literally was a train from the time the lunar service was being developed, and at the station's starting point and terminus, there was a diorama of an individual in a spacesuit doing work on the lunar desert. No matter how much you could visit it virtually on the net, tourists still flocked to the diorama as if showing some deference of gratitude as they took pictures of it. Once someone had the bright idea of making an incision in it to accommodate a box, so tourists would mistake it for a donation box. Supposedly it was filled to the brim with coins. However, what that guy failed to realize was that after only a few hours, the foolish tourists would have filled the box with donations. Then they would complain to the station attendant that they couldn't put any more in. Thus, the plan was foiled. After that, capitalizing on that idiot's bright idea, the station attendants installed a large unmarked box to collect small change from tourists. This was a classic example of a moment of carelessness toppling even a good get-rich scheme. There wasn't a lot of living space on the moon, so the lunar development train almost seemed to apologize as it shrank down and sped through the city. The train passed alongside the chaotic mismatch of buildings, and for a brief moment it was possible to look out the window to see the lives of people inside. Tourists took great amusement seeing their own country's culturally styled buildings and lifestyles. Of course, there were no cultural aspects I particularly saw that amused me at all. The moon was made up of a hodgepodge of immigrants. On top of that, it was a place where people who couldn't shake off Earth's gravity gathered, so the coloring was way too pale. That was why one could say that the line performed very well. Even those from my hometown who hoped to accomplish something would resolutely look coldly at all of this. This was the moon, after all, not Earth. As we passed each station, the townscape changed accordingly. From a chaotic atmosphere to orderly streets, the stateless nature of the place became more evident. Buildings, both straight and with elegant curves that did not exist in the natural world, multiplied. As perfectly trimmed trees grew in number, we had entered the White Belt. There were many advertisements within the train directed at the typical salaryman, with information on insurance for families. Again, the ground gradually lowered and the train slowly separated from it. The beautiful cityscape unfolded below, and soon we were traveling at a height equal to that of a 10-story building. No matter how beautiful a building was, there would still be provisions for the many complexities in life, as one would expect. Everywhere you looked, the green parks could be seen, and one could look down to see large canals. In contrast, far in the distance, one could see the chaotic town of Red Valley. I was impressed that they would dare come up with names like White Belt and Red Valley. As I thought about that, the train suddenly picked up a burst of speed. Along the streets below, all that could be seen were residential and commercial buildings, like a district of cold buildings. Now that we'd reached a height of 20 stories, we stopped being able to see the tops of buildings passing by. Beyond the glass windows, one could see the busy salaryman as electronic billboards started to flood the view. Before long, as if the train went right into a thick forest, we were covered in shadows, and vision was reduced greatly for a moment. The train continued to navigate through the groups of nearby buildings by going around them, then suddenly my vision cleared up again. This was a large plaza before the Newton Central Station. The vastness of the gigantic atrium would amaze not only travelers from Earth, but even those raised on the Moon. At 162 meters above ground, nanowires held up a massive clock and hologram screen right in midair. The train continued along this side of the large plaza and was eventually swallowed up within the terminal station. It, like Lunar City, can be considered a gathering of the highest levels of wealth and honor for mankind. Ooh, a new track. I get off the train and counted the number of advertisements that came into view. There were 3 from nanotech companies, 4 from major software corporations, 2 from biotech firms, 2 from insurance companies, and 6 from banks. And then there were 5 from investment banks. Each and every one of them was famous for their rate of earnings and prideful of the proceeds. And they had the task of sweeping up all the proceeds from the wealth on Earth and pumping it into this lunar city. Listing the world's companies that order from market cap within the top 100 companies, 37 of them were on the Moon. It's more than one would find in London or New York. The number of companies abandoning Earth and setting up their main offices here were great, and the number that wanted to strike it big was even greater. New Frontier has gathered up the brightest of folks in this era. As long as you had a talented mind and a net connection, you could come out on top. The Moon was different from Earth, where everything the eye could see had been developed owing to a large history. And old geezers wielded immense power, sitting high atop their thrones. Some random country couldn't monopolize power here, and because of the nuclear crisis, countries everywhere shied away from the bomb. Thus, the Moon was literally an empty place with no external annoyances. Even places second or third in a race to come here would still be more than enough for someone to become a key figure in the city. Though their footprints were no longer displayed along with the others in the City Tranquility Memorial Hall, without a doubt they stood on the forefront of humanity. For example, there was a bronze bust in front of the central entrance of Central City. The model of this overly serious-faced statue that seems to look down on pedestrians was E.J. Rockberg, who people said would have simply ended up as an excellent banker had he stayed on Earth. Right now he was the CEO of a top-class investment bank here on the Moon. At merely 29, he got involved in investing in the lunar development train. In those days, he worked vigorously in lunar development, which few people regarded with much interest as he gambled upon mankind's career and everything he had. That got the ball rolling. On Earth, stories were told about how he built the city from nothing, although many key figures would say that very few people understood what that really meant. It's just that they rode the wave well, they said. I supported those sentiments, even though everyone knew how they all approached it. It was less than ideal. At any rate, even though my parents came to the Moon at the same time that E.J. Rockberg did, it was evident in the difference in income levels that they worked at leveling the rock to put in soil for the growing and harvesting of crops. Was that not a job from trillions of years before? And on that note, it would have been easier to just have done that back on Earth. That was why I made sure to remind myself of this sometimes by coming all the way out to Newton City by train. Particularly, it was a place that those with little training or education would oftentimes find their big break in the city. If you left the station and headed in the opposite direction of the plaza, right before your eyes, was a path on the right-hand side of the towering building of the lunar government. Among the many glass-filled buildings in Newton City, there were many that were built using material cut from dark rock. Because of that, they looked plain at first glance. but in my opinion it is something that gives off an intimidating air, like something with an unequally powerful gravitational pull. That was the financial district, where banks and investment banks set up shop. Pointing to the street was a simple sign that said Schrodinger Street, and there next to it was a bronze statue of a small cat. That's cute. The cat had a sly expression in its eyes as it lay sprawled with one foot on a single gold plate. Engraved on the gold plate was this: "You can't know the outcome until you open the box." I thought that this was most appropriate for the financial district, although I hadn't succumbed to any religious beliefs here on the moon. I saw nothing wrong with petting the cat for good luck. I pet the cat on its head and ran my finger along the outline of the gold plate. "You can't know the outcome until you open the box." I came here for the sake of telling myself these words. There were many people who went from being mere errand runners to becoming the masters of the giant buildings that line the streets. I literally came to recharge my spirits here. Schrodinger Street on the weekend was pretty much filled with tourists like me. There were only a few taxis running around, not to mention the total lack of black luxury cars. You could see busy-looking people in suits, but the security guards in front of the 5-meter front entrance to the buildings were yawning out of boredom. There was a hot dog stand along the road. It was so famous that people ranged from hotshot bankers and traders making $1 million a month to the 6-mile-an-hour mailmen would all congregate and eat here. I heard that it was great being able to get your dog 10 seconds after ordering and then eat it with one hand. People would go to burger joints to eat a meal were considered second-rate, and people would go buy box lunches were just laughingstocks. Thus, being caught up in the flow of walking along the street, I bought a hot dog. Working on a day off? The vendor said something along those lines and placed a fat sausage in the bun. Oh, I didn't even think about replying along the lines of, "Don't treat me like a fool, I at least have a stable income." And being treated as one of the regulars here kind of filled me with joy. To me, making money was a means and not an end. However, after thinking long and hard about it, the fastest way to get rich had to be here. When I'd come to that decision, I felt a great reverence for the people at the head of the pack here. And with that, I realized that I actually did have a bit of fanboyism in me. A bit. So I thanked the guy, paid my respects to the people passing by, and walked off more fidgety than usual. The main offices of E.J. Rockberg, with top-tier investment banks like the Howard Brothers and Platinum Smith, were not far behind, established their massive buildings here. In order to make the most efficient use of space, Newton City was divided into 3 levels. There were underground level, the above ground level, and the sky level. I was currently in the sky level, and the main entrances for all the buildings were here. Below this were related companies and rented out office space. The underground and above ground level portions of the buildings on Schrodinger Street were filled with countless funds and consulting agencies. While walking around eating my hot dog, I would occasionally come across narrow and compact buildings with gilded signs and atriums, adorned with chandeliers and paintings. These weren't places where money exchanged hands, but rather places where those with enormous sums of money obtained official legal guarantees. Top-class law firms, accounting firms, and government outlets resided here. After walking a bit more, I arrived at an intersection. In front of me was a strangely shaped edifice that reminded me of the Colosseum in Rome. The entrance was dozens of floors above the pavement, and the stairs leading up to it formed its own plaza. It was such a special place that it was allowed to use up this much space. Occupying this intersection between Schrodinger Street and Bit Street, which was made up of software and media companies, was the Lunar United Stock Exchange. It could be called the city's source of wealth. It was a place where stocks from companies all over the world, not just from the moon, were traded. It was the pride of the world. Combined with various future markets, trillions of mules exchanged hands every single day. There were a lot of tourists and a lot of people crowded around the standard bronze statue at the entrance taking pictures. You could say this was the pinnacle of capitalism and humanity's expansion. The entrance was wedged between giant screens displaying market information 24 hours a day. Currently airing was a discussion between the vice manager of the Lunar Central Bank and the famous CEO, Platinum Smith, on the relaxation of regulations. Both of them were in their mid-40s and could be considered quite young by Earth standards. On the moon, someone in their mid-40s would be considered elderly, although these two were still full of confidence and energy. I leaned against the giant steps of the stock exchange and ate the rest of my hot dog slowly. Everything here was big, vast, and solid. Being a little brat, not even worth a scrap of tissue, buying a hot dog was the most that I could do here. However, I'll use the Moan computer in my bag to make money, eventually become one of the major players here. That wasn't much more than the first step in achieving my dream, but attaching a specific milestone to my goal made me think of how rash it was. However, there were many people who managed to pull it off in the past. Thus, there shouldn't be any reason I couldn't do it also. I wouldn't be able to understand without looking with eyes wide open. The CEO of Platinum Smith, who was talking on the screen, had a yearly salary of 37 million mules, being the highest amongst all of the major enterprises here in Schrodinger Street. Normal people would be quite satisfied in making 2 million mules over their lifetime, though no one would disagree that this yearly salary was monstrous. However, there were also many people who made at least 1 billion mules a year working in these offices. These were hotshots whose salaries definitely had teeth to them, and they made tons of money using their expertise and behaved almost like lone wolves. These were the people I looked up to in adoration, as I had neither a real educational background nor a financial backer. My ambitions had still not been fulfilled, so I could only watch them here, but eventually I would stand shoulder to shoulder with them as either rivals or comrades, instead of looking at them from a distance. They were unmistakably billionaires, holding on to the majority of the wealth in this world. Money. Just money. The object of my unbearable desires circulated here like a whirlpool. I squashed the hot dog wrapper and stood up impatiently. Time to head back and look for more money-giving trees, and eventually I would become someone who'd be acknowledged here. And then after that, while on the train, I fixed my hold on my bag while staring at the giant panoply of Newton City's receding buildings.